All right, guys. So independently on their own, we've talked about shifting curves. We talked about what happens whenever a demand curve is shifted. We talked about biceps. Remember, buyers, income, complements, expectations, preferences, um, substitutes. We talked about all these different things. Same thing with supply. We talked about what shifted a supply curve. Now, we only looked at those independently. We only saw, okay, whenever a demand is the only thing on the graph, what happens when it shifts? Same thing with supply. Well, today what's a little different is that we're going to put these together and see what kind of impact this has on our market whenever we put them together and whenever these shifts happen. So let's start with just kind of looking at the idea as a whole is, whenever we see a shift in supply or demand, what happens? Well, typically we are at this happy point in our economy, but if one of these curves was to shift to a new place, what would happen is that we have a new equilibrium. We're going to have a new point in our economy where our quantity demanded is equal to our quantity supplied. And so we're going to take a look at what those could be. Start with an increase in demand. We said an increase in demand means that we are demanding more at every single price point, which would be a shift to the right of our demand curve. Now, whenever that happens, as you guys can see, we have a new equilibrium here, E2. And so what has happened in this situation to get us to E2? Well, two things have actually happened. What has happened to our equilibrium price? Well, it's gone up. As you can see, if we draw our P2 price over to our equilibrium, it has increased from our initial price. And same things happen with our quantity. If you notice here, our quantity was here at Q1, but it increases to Q2 to get to E2. So whenever our demand curve shifts to the right, whenever our demand curve shifts to the right, we see a price increase and a quantity increase. And so I'm going to put this little chart up here in the corner. We're going to refer back to this, especially in the next video. But as you can see, demand increases, equilibrium price is positive, equilibrium quantity is also positive. Keep that in mind as we go. So second, let's see what happens with a decrease in demand. So what we're saying with a decrease in demand is that at every single price point, we're demanding less. And so we would see our demand curve shift backwards to the left. And here, whenever this happens, we have a new equilibrium point right here. Now again, what's happened to our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity? Well, in this situation, our equilibrium price has decreased, and so has our equilibrium quantity. It has also decreased. We went from Q1 to Q2. Now, again, kind of why is this? Well, if we look at it here, we were at this equilibrium point at E1, but let's say that our demand curve shifted backwards to the left. If we kept trying to sell here at P1, we would see, according to our old supply curve, or I guess any supply curve in this situation, is that we would be attempting to supply Q1. We'd be producing Q1, this number of product. However, the only amount that would be demanded is, if we go to our new demand curve, is right here. And so what this gap in between our supply curve and our new demand curve is a surplus. And so in order to close that surplus, we would see prices go down, less would be supplied, and we'd end up at this new equilibrium point. And so again, whenever we see a decrease in demand, our price is decreasing and our quantity is also decreasing. Again, and adding to our chart over here, when demand decreases, we see equilibrium price decreases is negative. We see equilibrium quantity is minus or negative. Increase in supply. So again, increase in supply means that more is being supplied at every price point, and we see a shift to the right of our supply curve. And whenever the shift to the right of the supply curve happens, what happens to our equilibrium? Well, again, first of all, let's draw some lines. And if we draw our price over to that equilibrium too, what we actually see is that our price has decreased in this situation. Our price has gone down. But what's happened to our quantity? Well, our quantity has actually increased to this new equilibrium. And so whenever we see a shift to the right of our supply curve, we see that our price decreases, like you can see here with this black arrow, but our quantity increases right here. And again, adding to our chart, equilibrium price is minus, equilibrium quantity is plus. And finally, is a decrease in supply. A decrease in supply means that less is being supplied at every price point. We had a number of different things that could cause this, but we have a new equilibrium point right here. Now, at our new equilibrium point, what's happened to our price and quantity? Well, what we find is that from our old equilibrium, our price has gone up. It went from P1 here up to P2 at our new equilibrium point. And what's happened to our quantity? Our quantity has decreased. It's gone from Q1 down to Q2. And so our price has increased, but our quantity has decreased. And what this does is it completes our little chart for us here, is that when our demand increases, our equilibrium price goes up, our equilibrium quantity goes up. Demand decreases is minus minus. Both of those will decrease. Whenever our supply increases, what we find is that our equilibrium price will go down, but our equilibrium quantity will go up. And finally, whenever our supply decreases, our equilibrium price will go up like we see here, but our equilibrium quantity will decrease.